One afternoon last winter, I took a quick trip out to the Catoctin Mountains. They're about 90 minutes northwest of my apartment here in Falls Church, Virginia. It was a very hastily improvised road trip. I'd been out walking in the Antietam battlefields for a while, and I thought, well, maybe I can just squeeze in a real hike today before I go home. So I jumped in the car and I headed out to Catoctin Mountain Park. I got there, drove about a mile into the forest to a very small parking lot. I got out and I started to hike down this one trail I know. It was about 3:30 by then. I didn't have a lot of time. You don't want to get caught anywhere near dark that deep in the forest. It can get very ugly. The weather was cold. It had been cold all day and kind of wet and gray. It was a Monday and windy too. So initially I didn't see any other hikers, which made sense. I figured what I'd do is go straight down this main trail that I knew, do an out and back walk, head out for about 40 minutes and then time it and come back. And that would give me enough time to get back to my car. I was only about 10 minutes into the hike and I did see some other hikers. It was a group of about 7 or 8 of them together, coming the opposite way. And there were older people. That stood out first thing. Not one of them was under 50. The other odd thing was that 2 of them were holding infants in blankets, holding them very carefully and delicately to their chests. Now that actually in itself wasn't that strange, because that close to Pennsylvania, you'll see sometimes, I don't know if it's the Amish or the Mennonites, they'll come down and they'll hike on the weekends mostly in the Catoctins with their families. And they always have children with them of all ages. So that was a little bit odd, but not terribly so. They didn't make any sort of eye contact with me as they passed. I actually sort of moved off the trail a little bit to let them go by. I took the opportunity to swig some water and pause, and I was watching them, and they went down about another 30 yards, and then they all took a right turn and started going down some side trail deeper into the woods. And my first thought was, well, I hope they understand how much time they have left before it does get dark, because that can happen very quickly in the mountains. You don't realize it's coming in so fast. But they seemed to know where they were going, seemed to have a sense of purpose. So they went deeper into the woods, and I moved down the main trail. I kept walking. I never really got warmed up. It was just so bitter out there. I went down, I reached the 40-minute mark. I stopped, took one more drink of water, and then I started to head back, right on schedule, keeping a very close eye on the sky. I still didn't see anybody else out there except for that group. And when I was starting to get within range of where I'd seen them, getting fairly close to my car, I saw that group come out of the woods again, off that side trail, and onto the main one. It was the same 7 or 8 people. The thing was, this time, those 2 infants were gone. They didn't have those babies clutched to their chests. Both of them, they were not there anymore. And one of the women who had been holding one, she had her hand up to her forehead, and she was visibly in distress. She sort of leaned against, I assume it was her husband, leaned against him as she walked very slowly. He was kind of leading her out. They took a left turn onto the main trail, facing away from me. I stood watching them, letting them go, giving them the right of way, and they walked on in the general direction of the parking lot. I thought, that's so odd. So I walked forward to the intersection of the main trail and that side one where they'd come from, and I looked into the woods, and I just wanted to know where they had been. I assumed this little trail led to some scenic overlook I didn't know about. I thought, well, maybe I don't have time to explore this. It's getting dark. But I decided to go. I started walking down this very, very thin, dense trail, and it became obvious that it was not officially marked. It was almost dead straight, very little variation, no elevation gain or loss. I just kept tramping through the woods, and at about the quarter-mile mark, I realized I'd run out of time. This was getting too dangerous to be exploring. But then the woods did open up. The trail just ended at a small, serene, perfectly still black pond. Tall reeds all around it. And there was not a single ripple in that pond, despite the breeze. It was just kind of dead. And there were no animal sounds around. No nothing. As I stood there and looked at the pond, I saw that the moon was already clearly visible in the sky and the light was fading. I just couldn't take my eyes off the water. Finally, I came back to real consciousness, reminded myself I had to go. So I turned and began to move back down that skinny path, moving more swiftly this time. And in 10 minutes, I had reached the intersection of that path and the main one. And I took a left, and I started walking very quickly back to my car. And soon enough, there was the parking lot. My car was the only one there. And when I really thought about it, I swear when I had first pulled in, it was the same thing. My car had been the only one. I started the engine, turned the heat on full blast, and I drove home. And that was almost a year ago. I've still never stopped thinking about the dead end where that path went and what may or may not have happened there.